All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. I'm super excited for our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I have gotten to know you a little bit, but for listeners that don't know you, I wanted to kick off the conversation today just by asking you to give us a little background on Mariposa Consulting Group and kind of what's the why behind your work.
I'm happy to jump in there. Well, I've been in the charter school space for 15 years and worked at Idea Public Schools for over 10 years and helped them scale from 12 schools to over 120 in a 10-year time period. And most recently was the chief operating officer at KIPP, Texas, and just love this side of education. And in around 2020, I started a small side hustle called It's Very Good. And there was just a pressing need for some support around enrollment, new community entry, operations, and marketing. And so I started doing a couple things here and there. And this past January, decided to just take the leap and go full time, changed the name to Mariposa Consulting Group, just as a nod to my heritage and also my name, which means butterfly. Mariposa translates to butterfly. And also the symbolism to just do what we do, which is help schools just transform their enrollment, marketing, and operations practices. And since then, we've really helped a lot of schools across the country and enrolled a lot of kids. And hopefully we've ignited some meaningful change for the organizations we support.
So I love it. And you are super unique in that you have such a hands-on experience background in actually doing the work. You mentioned, I think you said 10 to 112 or something like that at Idea. KIPP, Texas, obviously, is a massive organization. And so tell us a little bit about your personal experiences as an operator that kind of influence what you're doing today, because it seems like your kind of hands-on work led to going full in on Mariposa. So tell us a little bit more about how the operator experience now influences how you're supporting schools all across the country.
Yes. So 15 years on the operator side, you wear a lot of hats. Sometimes you wear a lot of hats at the same time. I just really loved being on the operator side and that balance of scrappiness, outcomes orientation, innovation, and really felt like that my personality is really driven in that way. Our organizations were really driven in that way. It forces a lot of creativity and a lot of, thinking outside of the box in a lot of different ways. And so I think we bring that to our clients every day. We know that they're operations leaders or enrollment leaders, and they don't have time for extensive discovery processes. We try to be minimal fluff. We're like, all right, let's jump in. We have one discovery call. By the next call, we're looking at data. We've got our sleeves rolled up and we're in there with folks because we really pride ourselves on being efficient. We like to see outcomes immediately. And I think that just comes from my scrappy upbringing, if you will.
The upbringing in the charter community. Okay, so I have to ask this. What's your take on the enrollment climate right now? Because you and I were both in Boston. I know a bunch of our listeners were in Boston a couple of weeks ago at the National Charter Schools Conference. And it felt like all of the discussions, at least that I was in, were around budget and enrollment. And those two are obviously inextricably linked. So I have to ask you, as an enrollment expert, What's your take on sort of the quote unquote enrollment crisis? Seems like it's easy to chalk it up and say, well, there's not much we can do. There's just less students. Like, what's your take?
Yeah, the enrollment climate has been really challenging for a lot of schools the last several years, especially post-COVID. There's certainly environmental factors such as population declines, gentrification, rising house costs, et cetera. There's marketplace factors such as increased competition, schools that used to not be performing really well are, doing better academically, which is great for kids. There are also like skill gaps. For many years, our sector didn't have to worry as much about enrollment. And so the muscle isn't as developed as it needs to be. So there's just like a confluence of things. However, I'm a type of person that operates with a lot of possibility. And I think although there are some headwinds, there's also a lot of tailwinds. And despite population declines, there are millions of children who need great schools. And even if the population is declining by 1%, there is still thousands and thousands of children around you and around all of our schools across the country. There's some research recently that is showing that parents are seeking their just right school option at higher rates than ever before, which gives us a lot to work with on the enrollment marketing side of things, because we just need to get our message in front of parents who are looking for what we offer. And then, learning this work and how to do it, if you have never had to, has never been easier, because there's a lot of partners who are working alongside schools every day. And there's a lot of on-demand resources. I think you had a Jen from Seminar on here not too long ago. She and Kristen have created this on-demand platform for charter leaders to access best-in-class tools. And, there's resources there that are turnkey and ready for you to use. And then there's partners like me and others who I know and really admire who work hand in hand with schools to teach them how to go and build this new skill. So yeah, there's definitely some challenges, and I don't want to undervalue like kind of what some schools are dealing with, but there's also a lot of things that are in our control that we can do as leaders.
Love it. Well, I want to unpack some of the things we can control, because I love the perspective that it's not all doom and gloom, and there's, still millions of students that need a fantastic education. So what I thought we'd do is maybe explore some of the common missteps. You mentioned, for a lot of schools, maybe historically enrollment wasn't a challenge and they had a waiting list. And so they just didn't really put a lot of brain power into it. But now they're having to. And so there's probably some common mistakes that people are making. And so I wanted to unpack a couple of these. And obviously with the caveat that these can be generic, broad speaking. Every school is a little bit different. Every community is different. But what would you say if I asked, what are like the top maybe 3 to 4 things that come to mind in terms of mistakes or things schools are missing as it relates to their enrollment strategy?
Yeah, I appreciate the caveat, because every community is different and every geography has its complexities. But generally speaking, and I wouldn't say they're mistakes per se, right? More of a lack of exposure. But I see 2 categories of areas of improvement. I see a technical side of things and then a more adaptive side of things. And on the technical side, I most often run into goal setting, not being sophisticated enough to support the current enrollment environment. I see a lack of resource allocation or sophistication around resource allocation, either underspending, understaffed, or not knowing how to measure what those investments are yielding. And then I don't often see folks thinking about their strategy that aligns with seasonality of parent behavior. And we can talk about that in a little bit. On the adaptive side, I think sometimes we're overlooking the parent experience. At the end of the day, parents are consumers. And just like, when you and I were making our last big purchase, there's got to be information that's easy to access. I need to hear about it a lot of times. I want you to follow up with me. It needs to be easy and work on a schedule that's centered around me. And I think sometimes we don't apply that to our education marketing work. 2 other things, like the culture of enrollment just isn't always where it needs to be. Organizationally, right? Folks come in and they're like, well, we've never had to do this before.
Right.
And so there's this kind of mental block of, well, we've never had to do this. Why do we have to do this now? Why aren't they just still coming to our schools in droves? So that is something we face quite a bit. And then there's, that feeling of like, well, we've tried everything. And even if you've tried everything, like time and place makes a difference. So like, it's maybe time to try everything again. So, I see a bunch of those types of things. There's some pretty clear patterns.
Okay. So we've got technical challenges and adaptive challenges. I think that's a good distinction. I want to dive into a couple of these and have you flesh out a few of these challenges before we get to some potential solutions or some other things to be considering. So why don't we start with the technical side? We'll just go kind of in order here. You mentioned goal setting and then resource allocation. Let's maybe take these two together, or you can separate them, whatever you think is best. But tell us a little bit more about what goals are we even talking about? So let's think about that school that was in the fortunate position to have droves and droves of students, and now they're all of a sudden they don't have an enrollment marketing strategy. Where do they even start with goal setting?
Yeah. So one of the things that I often see is that where they start is the only number that they look at is their like budget driver. Like, what is the number that we need to have hit that financial threshold? And for the enrollment work, it's really a best practice to build out tiered targets that are going to support the full like enrollment process. And it really works like a marketing funnel, if you will. If you need to have 100 students on your count day, well, you need to have 105 on the first day. Then that means you need to have 110 registered. That means you need to recruit 150. And so when schools unintentionally only focus on that budget number, when they experience attrition, they end up in a situation where they have to backfill or make cuts. And that's just really because of the lack of the muscle around how to do the proper target setting for this work. So I see that quite a bit.
Is a part of this the people challenge or the who's driving the goal setting? Because to your point, if it's primarily a budgetary driven exercise, I would assume the finance team or maybe the board or whoever is playing around with the Excel model is setting enrollment targets maybe. What do you see in terms of how should goals maybe get created, or what are the common mistakes in the goal creation process in terms of ownership?
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of our enrollment leaders as the recipients of numbers and not having the opportunity for input. So one best practice that other side I see is when operations, academics, and financial leaders are working together to set those targets. They're keeping the academic program in mind. They're keeping all of the operational implications in mind and the financial health of the organization in mind. And that's really where we see the sweet spot of success of taking the perspectives of all of those really key players in what our enrollment numbers exist to do, right? Support our academic programming. When everybody's at the table, I see better goal setting, target setting, and it really sets up schools for more success.
Okay, so what about resource allocation? What are maybe some of the common missteps as it relates to, I think you mentioned time and then sort of allocation of fiscal resources. Talk us through some of the things that you commonly see with clients you support.
Yeah, I commonly see like a lack of understanding of what's contributing to the bottom line. And at a basic level, it's important for schools to know what's driving their applications or what's driving conversion so that they can double down on that and do more. And so that's one opportunity that exists across the board. For those who are fortunate enough to have dedicated staff or even some partially dedicated staff to this work, there are ways to maximize the time of those personnel. And I see a lot of schools make comments like, well, they're just so busy or there's so much to do. And that's true. The enrollment work is year round. There is a lot to do, but there's also peak times to do certain activities and there's a seasonality to the work. And so making sure that as you're thinking about an FTE investment, partial or a whole FTE, what is their schedule going to look like so that we can really match the time of day with the activity that's going to yield the most outcomes of that time, and then also the time of year. And when you have that mapped out, your ROI I've seen just be much better for that investment of personnel, which, as we all know, is really challenging in the school environment right now to add headcount. And then similarly on the marketing side, when you know what's contributing to your applications, then you know what levers to pull or you know what to add or take away during certain times of the year. And so I just see a lack of understanding of how everything plays together. And that's an opportunity for schools to just get more specific and have stronger outcomes.
Got it. So I want to come back to some solutions on that side as well. But before we get to that, let's jump to some of the adaptive challenges that you had called out for us. So let's just pick one or two of these. How about this? Missing that parents are consumers. We're recording this on July 16th, which happens to be Amazon Prime Day. So I'm crushing Amazon reviews as my wife and I decide which vacuum we're going to buy. I'm full in on being a consumer today. So where do schools get this wrong as it relates to our parents and families?
I think a lot of times we focus on the transactional aspect of the work and we don't really equally balance the nurture side of things. That's one example. So in a tactical way, that looks like me getting a message from my daughter's school that says, Vanessa, your birth certificate is missing for your daughter. Please upload it by Friday. So that's super transactional. I don't feel warm and invited into that conversation at all, versus another message that might say, we can't wait to meet your daughter on the first day of school. We noticed that a couple of things are missing. Do you have 5 minutes today? I'd love to help you through that process. You're still getting to the same end result, which is like me uploading the document, but instead you've taken it from a transaction to like it being this warm, nurturing conversation. So that's like one example. Another example is just time and the ways that we communicate with our families. So a lot of parents work full time. And so when we're trying to reach out to them at 10 or 2, that's during the workday. And so modifying our schedules to be at a time that's a bit more convenient to match the consumer where they are is another quick pivot that I often advise for folks, or even you can schedule those messages, right? So that they're sent at those times. And then, paying attention to things that are happening around us and taking advantage of any like trends that we can, that's going to match the moment. So I don't know, maybe there's something. If you're a school that has uniforms that are available on Amazon, right? Like match Prime Day with your Amazon Prime with your uniform sales and like try to cross market those types of things, other ways of kind of matching the moment and where parents are going to be.
Awesome. Okay. So I want to do one more on the adaptive side, and I want to go with the last one, which was sort of this sentiment that we've tried everything. And you mentioned, it's important to maybe consider the time and the place, or maybe the pace, things we often talk about on the academic side. But tell us a little bit about how to work our way out of that feeling as an organization, because I would imagine it's discouraging if you feel like we've pulled all the levers, we've thrown the kitchen sink at this thing, and the numbers are not looking good.
Yeah, the good thing about this work and what keeps me so energized about it is that there's just always something you can do. And even if you have tried a specific tactic, there is a way to make a change to that particular thing that gives it a whole new life and a whole new opportunity to work. So what I would encourage anyone who just feels like they're putting their hands up because they feel as though they've tried everything is to take a step back. First, look at your goals and your numbers and identify where is the challenge. Are you having a challenge attracting people to your school? Or are you having a challenge converting people from like in progress to the finish line? Identify where that is, and then start to look at what you've done, thinking through all of the different types of communication. Have we sent an email? If we've sent an email, has it only been through our enrollment system, or have we also tried sending it through Outlook? Have we only sent those during the workday? Have we tried in the evening? Do they always only have text, or have we tried an image? Have we changed the sender? Those are examples of ways that you can change just one tactic. Moving down, text messaging, right? And you just keep going through that process to make sure that you're really thinking through the changes that you can make that could change the performance of the particular thing. I see the most change in digital advertising. We work with a lot of schools, and when we change the message, we change the picture, we change a slight targeting parameter, and we'll see just change in outcomes because we've made just like micro changes to the thing. We're still doing digital advertising, but because we've done all of these other things, it's like it's going to make a big difference. And so that's what I would encourage folks to do, is take a step back. Where's really the challenge? And then identify all of the levers you've pulled and what micro changes can you make to them to see if they'll yield a different outcome.
All right. Well, we got into some tactical recommendations there, which I love, and I want to explore a few more because like you said, it's often not maybe doing something new, but it's rethinking how things have been done and making micro changes. So, we talked about some of these common pitfalls. We walked through a few of those. Let's flip to the other side. Let's talk about some tactical recommendations. And you've kind of touched on a few of these throughout the conversation thus far. But if we had to give maybe your top three or three good ones for things that schools should be doing or should be considering to level up their enrollment strategy, what would you say? Let's kind of walk through these one by one.
The first thing is to get your data organized. And you can do this by, getting chart paper and going into a room and writing down every school, every grade, what is the budget minimum, and then what are those tiered targets for each school and each grade. Just really understand the lay of the land and the full pipeline that supports it. Driving toward a goal that is not just your baseline is really important so that you're building the buffers that you need for your organization. So we set a first day of school target with the partners that we work with. An over-enrollment target is another term that I hear quite a bit. That just is building that into your day-to-day practices can make a big difference in like what you're chasing so that you're prepared for that. And then I think some other data points to look at is, how many students are returning. Don't lose sight of your attrition or your persistence, because we are seeing higher rates of attrition than we ever have. And so we make some assumptions that everybody who was here last year is coming back, and that's just not the case anymore. The national average for student attrition in our sector right now is around 12%, and it's higher in some geographies. And so really keeping an eye on that so that you're prepared for any attrition. That's on the data side.
I was just going to ask, are there any other, I guess the attrition one is a really good one in terms of not factoring the correct percentage in for that, because if you lose, a certain amount in your bucket, so to speak, you have to double that amount to gain 12%. Are there any other data points like that come to mind that are commonly overlooked or maybe misinterpreted?
Maybe not overlooked, but the conversion rate of people in the process is generally overestimated. So the steps are somebody gets an offer, the family has to say yes, then that family has to register, and they go through several steps in that process. So oftentimes I see schools, everyone who says yes, they're like, well, they're all coming, and that's fake news. They are not all coming. And then everybody that's like in registration in progress, they're like, well, they're all going to come through. And that's also not accurate. And so just making sure you're being conservative with the assumptions that you're making around pipeline movement. Again, going back, parents are consumers. Many of them have their names in other schools or other hats because they just want to see what's the right fit for them. And so we should not ever expect 100% of our pipeline to materialize. And that is often something I see. And then the last thing is just not having benchmarks. We do a lot of benchmark setting across our own partners. Thankfully we work with schools across the country, so we get to see some trends, and knowing what is the trend for either your community or your grade level for different things like lead to application conversion or cost for acquisition is really helpful in setting your strategy on the data side as well.
All right. So getting the data right, that's our starting place. Recommendation number one. What do we have for number two?
I think we didn't really talk about this too much, but leveraging automation for messaging to address just drop off and make sure that you're keeping families warm, that engagement, that parent experience that we've touched on a little bit. There's so much that we can do with even a lot of the application systems that we use have scheduled features. A lot of our folks are using HubSpot, which has great scheduling features, all of it. I mean, there's so many different ways to just make sure that we're continuing to communicate with families so that we're minimizing drop off in our funnel. We're continuing to engage them, educate them, inspire them so that they're more likely to show up on the first day of school.
Okay. Final recommendation before we wrap up here.
Yes. Okay. My last one is to make sure that you're activating your soon to be new families. We just kind of as a sector generally like focus on, okay, we've got to keep our kids and then we've got to get the new ones. And then once they get to registration, it's like we hope and wait and get them to the first day of school. But there's a big opportunity for us to take those new, soon to be new families and excite them to a point of affiliation where they then are sharing that they're excited to join our school. They might be referring their friends and they can become a new set of advocates for you in your school if you are communicating with them just right and you're making their just right asks. And so that would be my other tip for folks is to activate those new families because they are the most excited right before they join your school community.
That's a really thoughtful one. I would not have thought of that. And my intuition would have said, let's take our families who've been here for years and years and put them out as our brand face. But it totally makes sense. Like back to parents being consumers, when you buy something or you make that decision, you want all your friends to do the same thing.
Yes.
So practically, what does it look like to put those families to work? Are you talking about like getting them in the field with a booth and some flyers? Is it doing video testimonials? Is it all the above? What are some practical ways to activate those new families?
It can be. And you certainly should activate your existing families as well. I'm assuming you're already doing some of that. But I think for new families, like think about, again, going back to that consumer mindset, right? Like, what are you going to do right away when you get that vacuum you talked about earlier? You're going to write a review once you get it and it works. So many parents are ready to post a social media message that they're so excited to join with some photo prop that they can hold up with their kiddo that's like soon to be student at, XYZ school, and they're like ready to post it. That's one example of activation. Giving brand new families a yard sign that they can put out in their window or their yard to promote that they're a proud soon to be student there is a passive way to like spread the word that that's where they're going to go. Or on the more like aggressive side of things, like ask them to help you identify other new families in their neighborhood who could be a prospect for you. There's really a range of things. But I think like at the baseline, like send them some messaging that they can push out for you. They're likely to do it because they're excited about the choice that they've just made for their own family.
Love it. And I really appreciate the emphasis on making it easy. Don't make them think, provide the template, just say, post this. I think that's super, super practical advice. All right. So Vanessa, this has been a really interesting conversation. You've provided some great look-fors on the things that people might be doing that they don't realize they're doing, as well as some tactical advice. Where should listeners go if they want to learn more about you or Mariposa Consulting Group or connect with your team?
Great. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Vanessa Barry. You can find us online. Our website is mariposacg.com. Those are the two easiest ways. We have an inactive Instagram account. You can find us there, but we're not posting a lot. My personal Instagram is a little bit more exciting. So I'd go to LinkedIn or website right now.
All right. I love it. You're too busy helping other schools with their Instagram account. Don't worry about your own. That's right.
Exactly.
Any sort of final other recommended resources for leaders who are looking to sink their teeth into enrollment marketing strategy? Any other things we should link in the show notes?
There are several webinar series that are available for anyone who's interested. I know I just recently did one with Seminar. We're planning another one. So stay tuned for that. Free access to good turnkey resourcing. If you are part of the Charter School Growth Fund portfolio or any of those other intermediaries, there are a lot of tools within those groups. And then always just pick up the phone and ask. The charter school community, one of my favorite things about it is that it just is full of people who just want what's right for kids and what's best for families. And we are more often than not willing to share something that we may have developed that's going to help you.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.